Okay, so Kirsten, why don't you just start out by introducing yourself?
My name's Kirsten Edgerton, and I'm a parking enforcement officer with the Toronto Police Service.
Okay, so right now you have a serious face, but you were just smiling quite a bit. You were just smiling quite a bit before we got on camera. And what I was going to say was, I would expect that parking enforcement officers can't smile ever because you always have people who are angry at you, right? How do you keep that positive demeanor?
I just kind of I go with the total thought of, you know what, you got to kill them with kindness type of thing. I understand that they're mad about they got a ticket. I've gotten parking tickets. I know how upsetting it is, but you know what? I did wrong. And a lot of
Yes.
people do understand that, whether they like it or not. And I usually find that people who get the most upset are people who are habitually getting parking tickets. And it's really,
Oh,
they're really mad at themselves, but they're just venting and they're
uh,
letting it go. And it's like, sorry, man, but
uh,
unfortunately you parked in a no parking area,
yes.
you
Okay, wait
know?
a second. Have you gotten a parking ticket since becoming a parking enforcement officer?
I have.
Really? So was this like
Yeah,
it slipped your mind, or you were watching the time and you're like, shoot, I'm gonna get a ticket, but I'll just eat this ticket?
yeah, yes. Well, it was once. It was I was working at a job, and it was like late at night, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's midnight. It's permit streets, and I had to go move my car, and I totally forgot. And I get down, I see the ticket. I'm like, well,
Ah,
my fault.
yes.
Or I was visiting a friend on private property, and we totally had forgotten to put a parking slip on
Ah,
it. So these things happen. But the worst
yes.
for me is I knew who the officer is.
Oh,
Like
really?
right? But I never say anything to them. So because I know, you know what, there is a level of embarrassment because people think, well, the parking officer should know,
Yeah.
right? And everything's different. I was in Los Angeles and I thought I read all the signs straight. And I came back to a ticket on the car. And of course, all my friends were laughing because the parking officer should know
Yeah,
better.
exactly.
But I thought I did, and I clearly did not. We make
How do
mistakes.
tickets down in Los Angeles compare to tickets in Toronto?
Very expensive.
Really? More
Yeah,
expensive?
people think here, I won't deny they're quite hefty. Some should
Yeah.
be heftier than others,
Yep.
but they are pretty hefty. I think it was, but that particular offense was very comparable to ours. It was $150 ticket because it
Yeah.
was parked in a taxi cab stand, same as here in
Ah,
Toronto. But of course, it's on a rental car, so we then
yes.
now have to deal with it, right?
Can't everything be a taxi now? I
I
mean, you
know,
just
right?
slap an Uber or a Lyft sticker on and, you
And just
know,
download that and say, "Oh, I didn't
yeah,
realize."
exactly. I didn't realize. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Kirsten, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Tell me about you. Where did you grow up? Tell me about your childhood. Just tell me about little Kirsten Edgerton growing up
Little
in, was
person
it Whitby?
interesting.
Was it Ajax or was it
It was in the Durham
Pickering?
region area. I can
Yes.
honestly say, like, I grew up my younger years in the south end of Pickering, then
Oh,
moved to North Ajax, then to South Ajax. And when I went out on my own, I went out to Curtis, and now I'm
yep.
back in Whitby, and I've been there for like the last 12 years.
Wow, you've really done the Durham region
I
tour.
have.
You like
Yeah,
it?
I have.
I lived in Durham region. I was in Ajax, but I love it. And especially you just said with South Pickering, I mean, and South Ajax for that matter, the waterfront is just gorgeous. So what a wonderful place for you to grow up. Okay,
Mhm.
so you were growing up in Durham region. Something pivotal happened, and we just talked about this off camera. So to make sure that you're comfortable, but I wanted to bring it up because I think that it really speaks to a lot of who you are in terms of your work ethic and whatnot. Your
Mhm.
dad died when you were in high school. Can you just tell me about that and the impact that it had on you and how busy you were then after that and in the years to come?
It's, I guess when you're 16 years old, it's not something really you think about. I mean, it's Christmas time. You're all excited on Christmas break from high school, and the unimaginable happens. It takes Your dad has a massive stroke. He dies 4 days later. You're burying him like the day before Christmas.
Jeez.
It's not something that it happens so fast, and it was something that was, it was traumatic at the time, but it actually became more traumatic later in life. But in the time, a lot was going on in the family. And then my grandmother had taken ill, my mom's mom, and she passed away 6 months later. So there was a lot of grief going on in our
No
family, right? A
kidding.
lot of stuff going on. But I was still a teenager, right? I still needed to be that kid, and I was that kid. I didn't grieve in the moment. And so I really did throw myself into, well, I wouldn't say my schoolwork. My teachers probably can confess to that. Wasn't the
Really?
best
Okay.
student, but I did throw myself into sports,
Yeah.
and I threw myself into working after school as well. So a lot of the times in the morning, I'd either be on the ice playing hockey or be in the pool swimming. And then after school, I'd be on the court playing basketball or badminton. And then also in the pool afterwards. And then I go off to work. And I had 2 or 3 jobs during high school as well.
Wow.
And that, I think that really kind of set me up to the kind of work ethic that I have now, is because I did keep myself busy,
Yeah.
and I did, get into that. And I had an older brother who had a very strong work ethic,
Yeah.
and I follow along through him. Like, his dream always, when he was even a kid, to be a firefighter, and he is now a captain with the Toronto Fire Department.
Oh,
But he
amazing.
himself always had a couple of jobs growing up. As soon as he could work, he did. He
Mm.
always bought a car when he was 16, and that was my big thing too. I needed a car to
Wow.
get around. So we worked really hard to do these things. So I really kind of followed him in that
Yeah.
aspect. And he volunteered a lot with the fire departments before he get on full time, because that's just a process they do. And it used to bug me when I was a kid, because 2 o'clock in the morning, his alarm would go off in his bedroom, thumping out the house to get to the first alarm when he was like 19 years old.
Wow.
But he worked hard to get where he is. And
No kidding.
I was the same way. I followed him. Well, if he can do it, so could I, right? I had 2
Yeah.
or 3 jobs, and same with him. It worked out well.
And I know, like, just through some of the various paths you've taken in your life, which we'll get to, you've met kids who probably have lost their parents around the same age, and maybe their lives go in a very different direction. You said something to me during our previous phone conversation. You said that you made the choice, you either step up or step out. And so do you think it was your brother that inspired you to do that, or just your upbringing? Like, you made a conscious decision to move your life in a positive direction from that devastating loss.
I think that I could have gone the other way. I mean, and I had every excuse possible. And I don't think that any guidance counselor in school would have done the same thing. In high school, I happened to be one of the first ones of my friends who lost a parent. Oddly enough, that every year going through high school, another person had lost a parent, and it was always at
Really?
Christmas, interesting enough.
Really?
So I was very close with one of my guidance counselors, Ms. Hodgson, and I used to babysit for her and everything. And we actually started this once a month check-in, where we would sit down with cookies and milk, and we would talk about what's going on at home, how are things going, because you're also dealing with a grieving parent who has to also parent you, right? And a lot of that was our thought process as well, putting undue stress onto our parents, being that kid. But because I didn't have time to be a let loose, fancy free kid, I never got into that. Like, I'm not saying I was an angel, right? I wasn't, but I never got in trouble with the law. I knew better not to do wrong. And working and keeping in sport was very important, and it kept me busy and out of all that stuff. But my brother, I won't deny, he kept me in line. He'll say the same thing, but we're close, and we're so close today. And that, I think that speaks volumes, right? And I see other kids who have less of any advantages that I have, that you watch them and you're like, you're making that choice. Sometimes you are a product of your environment, and there's something you can't, but you need to make that conscious decision and that conscious choice, right?
That's awful, but also very fascinating that your friends also lost their parents through high school and around Christmas time. Do you think, did any part of that help you, or were you guys able to help each other through that time, having shared such similar experiences?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then of course, obviously there's always a situation when cultures are indifferent, or if somebody is the elder of the child or the younger of the child, or in the middle, or if they're an only child. But when we start talking about things that are happening at home, well, it's happening across the board, because it's a grief process. But when you're 16, there's not things you think about, right? When you're 17, you're 18, you're not things. But then when your friends start saying the same thing, you're kind of like, okay, this is normal.
Wow.
We're normalizing this situation with each other.
Yeah.
And I praise that guidance counselor and that time for, sitting us down and recognizing.
Oh, so the guidance
something was
counselor,
there.
you're talking about, like, the cookies and milk, that would be like a group session.
Yes.
I was thinking she did that with you one-on-one before the other kids.
No. But then, he would always say things after the fact, because we became a little bit closer. One girl was a little bit younger. And with her, it was a little bit different because she had a culture. The other two, I'd known them since kindergarten. So knowing Nathan and Melody, and we knew each other, but as we grew up together, I mean, we always went through the school systems together, but we weren't extraordinarily close friends. But this kind of brought us together, had that same kind of feeling and problems that were happening.
Of course, you don't feel so alone.
No.
And can I just say how sweet it is that your guidance counselor would not only have cookies at these meetings, but also milk. Like, that's
I know,
so
right?
sweet.
Yeah, she was a very sweet lady.
Bunch of high school students. That's so nice. Okay, so you were so busy, as you mentioned, and you still are, and we're going to get to that. But just tell me about, like, when you were a teenager then. I think you said you had been working retail jobs or something like that. That's what you said in our previous conversation. So what were your aspirations beyond high school then? Did you always want to become a parking enforcement officer, or because you've hopped around quite a bit? So just tell me a little bit about your path.
Yeah, actually, it was funny. I always thought, because I was such an active sporto kind of kid, that I would go into sport. And I actually went to college for sports management. However, during that time, the government had changed all their funding to sport halfway through the program. That was during the Harris government. And then all the jobs that were available at that time were now gone. So I kind of had to pivot in what direction do I want to go in. And then funny, I even thought about dental hygiene. But I'm like realizing that's a lot of studying to do. But I did take some dental hygiene courses in college. It was like, there's a lot. I mean, it's just the mouth, but there's a lot you got to know.
There's a lot of teeth in there. You
Yeah,
got the
a lot
gums,
going
the
on.
teeth, you got a tongue in the middle. Yeah.
So I kind of was like, but you know what? Law enforcement was always something I kind of gravitated to. So I actually started to volunteer with Durham Regional Police.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Volunteered out of their community office that used to be at the Oshawa Town Center.
Okay.
And I kind of got that feeling for it, and kind of got that bug for it.
Yeah.
And
What did you do there?
Oh, we just sat in the volunteer office. There was police officers that worked there. We assisted them on some stuff. Sometimes we would go out to the safety village that they have in Whitby.
Okay.
And we would volunteer our time assisting the officer there. Sometimes they have a lot of events that goes on there, or we go to bike rodeos, anywhere that they needed us. But we got a lot of like hands-on look at what policing really was. And I was probably about 2021 at the time when I did that.
What did you like about it?
I just the interaction.
Yeah.
And just kind of, you get a lot of people that would just walk by the community office just to say hello. And you got to know people in the community because it's the police office, right?
Yeah.
They figure out there's a police officer, but then you come in and I'm sitting there. But you just start having like a little chit chat. And a lot of it was your morning mall walkers, right?
Yes.
They
Yes.
just want somebody to talk to. But I did like it. You just kind of got that. But I felt the most was this big sense of community, right? So you know kind of what you were getting into.
Yeah.
So it gave me kind of that snapshot. So I started taking courses at night at Durham College. This is before Police Foundations was even a course.
Oh, really?
So I think there were 6 of us who signed up for this, and we started doing it. Actually, Dave Perry.
Oh, yeah, I know Dave Perry.
I know you know Dave Perry was one of my first instructors.
Wow,
and
interesting.
One of the first instructors that actually helped to get this program up and running and for it to become a full-time course.
Wow. Okay.
And it was funny. They got us t-shirts made that said, "We do it at night." And I think I don't know. I do have an old picture of Dave and I from that time, but it was because of us and our interest in these courses for policing that they've made it a full-time course.
Wow.
I don't know. My gosh, we're going back 95, maybe. Myself. But that was kind of like, all right, let's get this going. So through that, I met a couple of guys who were working security downtown at the time, and they're the ones who introduced me to the Toronto Community Housing Corporation. At the time, it was MTHA.
Okay. So they were working for community housing? They
were trying themselves to get in. Okay. So they talked to me about it. So we all applied at the same time. We all got hired. At the time, they had security backgrounds, these guys. So they went into the security side. I was in a security division, but I was actually hired as a dispatcher. So it was like my first introduction to law enforcement, my first introduction to working shift work too as well. Yeah. So that was my first step in 1999 of starting in law enforcement and getting that kind of like little bug going on.
So how did you enjoy dispatching?
It was
what was it? What is it like dispatching for Toronto Community Housing? I just wonder whether there are like similarities or differences. I mean, there are definitely differences.
It was interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me about it.
I mean, I think because I've never been a 911 officer, I do have friends that are 911 officers, and there is a big, strong comparison. But when you have an individual who calls you first for shots fired, instead of calling 911, you, as a Toronto Community Housing dispatcher, have to get as much information as you can to then call 911 on their behalf, because they don't feel safe. You're their first line of defense. You're the person who's going to pick up first. They call you first. Because they don't want to be bothered with that entity of it. They don't want to deal with the police. They want to deal with you. You're the security. So that was, I think, the big first shocker for me. Yeah, that's really surprising. Like I feel like I've walked through a number of TCHC complexes around the city, and you guys have like, there would be like a number up for people to call, right? Yes.
So maybe somebody just sees that number, but it's fascinating to me. You reminded me of a conversation that I had with a neighborhood community officer in 43 Division, Constable Amanda Frederick. And she was describing one time how somebody called her cell phone to
Oh,
say that they heard shots fired. And
yeah.
she's like, okay, you need to call 911. I'm not anywhere close to you, but it was just very telling of the relationship that she had formed
Mhm.
because they trusted her and they felt comfortable calling her when they were worried about their kids who were outside, and they
Yeah.
didn't call 911. So it's really interesting that people would call TCHC housing or security
Mhm.
first before calling 911. Okay, so
Right.
what else surprised you about that
It's
job?
well, you can get any kind of call. Sometimes they're just bored, some residents, and they know if they call, we're always going to pick up.
Mm.
But unfortunately, we had a lot of people who would just do like a daily check-in,
They're
right?
checking in on you?
They're checking, they're check. Well, good question. But
Or
you
are
know
they
what?
checking in on like is there anything going
Yeah,
on around my
yeah.
community?
But there's times where we're like, wait a minute, we haven't heard from that caller in a while.
Oh.
There's been situations like that. We talked to the officer today, but you want to slide by their unit and see if everything is okay. And then they find out, oh, apparently like a couple weeks ago they passed away, or the officer themselves in that moment find out they passed on. And now we're
Wow.
finding a sudden death situation.
Really?
Uh, or sometimes we find out through the grapevine this person has passed on. Oh, you know what I mean?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
very interesting when your frequent flyers, as we would call them, aren't calling in. You do
Mhm.
wonder.
Mhm.
You do wonder what has happened to them, what's going on,
Mhm.
because a lot of them, we know they have emotionally disturbed problems. And
Mhm.
that helps because we're the people that know how to calm them down, how to deal with it, right? So
Hmm.
a lot of that goes on.
Okay, so you're doing like de-escalation stuff over the phone, like over dispatch from
Mhm.
where were you? Like, are you located downtown when you're doing dispatch for community housing, or is
At
it
the time, we were right downtown. Yeah, but we
okay?
would dispatch the whole entire city. So, and the ways and things worked way back then, there
Yeah.
was no input, the address, and it pops up and populates and tells me where I got to send somebody. I had to know every single address in the Toronto Community Housing.
How many properties are there?
Oh, well, let's just say we're the largest in North America,
North
right?
America. Yeah.
Largest community, one of the largest
Jeez.
next to like in Chicago and LA.
Yeah.
And it was a lot. At first, I was dumbfounded. You've taken this little girl who's always been in Durham,
Yeah.
23 years of age, and you're throwing her as a dispatcher. And I'm like, you hear these places on the news all the time, Regent Park, Jane
Yeah.
and Finch. And now I'm like working for this company that
Yeah.
deals with this stuff. So it was really much a large eye opener as well. I think one of the biggest problems for myself was accents. It's not
Mm,
something you think about when
right.
you're going to a communicative role that you might be able to communicate,
Mhm.
but the person on the other end isn't.
Mhm. Or they
Sometimes
don't
some
speak
people
English at all. Yeah.
know, and you really have to like decipher what keywords are, or they're trying to get in a conversation, try to keep them focused on the conversation, try to
Mm,
get to like what I call the meat and potatoes of the conversation, why we need to get somebody rolling to where they are, and
mm,
really even just to see what the security threat is.
mhm.
That was probably the first probably roadblock I think I held when I first started working there, and now
Mm.
I'm like a magician.
You
I
can
have
pick it up. Yeah, it's like it's like my
to.
kids who when the youngest was younger, he's 4 now, but not really able to talk, and his older siblings would be translating for me. They're like, "Oh, that's what he wants." I'm like, "That is not what he's saying." I'm like, "Is this what you're saying?" He's like, "Yeah, that's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
what I
yeah, pretty
they
much.
know. When you know, right? So as a dispatcher with enough experience, you can
Mhm.
decipher and pick out those important things. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
interesting. So then from dispatching, how long were you there and where did you go from there?
Ooh, I dispatched for a little about a year,
Mhm.
and then
Okay.
I moved on to become a security officer within the company.
And were
So,
you happy to do that? Like, that is what you wanted
yeah,
to do initially, right?
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's what
okay.
I figured out, like, this is where I wanna go in life.
Yep.
I became a security officer with them, and, I continued taking night school courses,
Okay.
uh, in police
The
foundations at
police
that time,
foundations,
just
yeah.
kinda like that. But I got a little sense. I mean, I'm embedded in the communities. I'm a community officer, and I'm working with, at the time I was working in 41 Division, so I
Mhm.
had a community down there
So
and
Southwest Scarborough,
type
basically.
of area,
Yeah.
yeah. And I got to know, my crew guys really well. They were really good with me. they really just basically really held my hand and taught me a lot that I needed to know, because when, as a housing officer, we went to our communities and we
Mhm.
were alone.
Yeah. Okay. So when you just said you got to know the crew officers, you're talking about the community response unit,
Yes.
Toronto police officers.
Yes.
So you're going in there like that baffled my mind when you told me that in our previous conversation that you're
Mhm.
working in there by yourself. So
Mhm.
so tell me more about that, what that was like going from dispatching in downtown Toronto to your own neighborhood when you're where you're expected to, get to know everybody and kind of police the place, right? And all by yourself. And you're still
Mhm.
in the police foundations course.
Yeah. It was shell shocking. I
Mhm.
won't deny it. Like, it was like, and I was being told that by other officers who spent their time in dispatch. Then what they feel, they said, whole of the world, right? And I'm like, yeah. Like, I was very green. I didn't know a lot. If anything, I didn't know anything, right? I knew how
Mm.
the ins and outs of dispatch work and how the actual corporation itself worked. But as far as being an officer enforcing and what rules I had to follow, that was all new to me.
Mm.
So I was very, you know what, I won't say deny, there was a fear factor there. Of course
Mhm.
there was.
Mhm.
And I think it was a couple of weeks on the job when I got initiated by the individuals in the neighborhood by
Mhm.
swarming me. But I was, smart enough to get to a safe space.
Mm.
But that was a point where I went, okay, now you got to put your big girl pants up. You got
Mhm.
to figure this out and let them know. And I was able to, within a week, figure out
Mhm.
who everybody was,
Mm.
and
How did
we
you do that? Like just talking to the police in the neighborhood or getting to know the other residents?
other
Because it's
residents.
always such a small percentage of the population that causes all the crap for
There
everybody
is.
else, right?
Yeah. And it was the first time, one, they've ever had a female work there.
Mm.
For years, they had a particular officer, a male officer who was older. He was there for years upon years, and they were moving him out.
Mm.
So, like anybody else, they don't like change either.
Mhm.
So they all of a sudden have me in there, and I'm walking around the neighborhood. I'm getting to know the spaces. I'm, to them, too visual,
Oh.
right? And that was a bit of a complaint. Well, I figure I had a job to do, right?
Yeah.
This is where I need to go with this. But I was very fortunate that a lot of the individuals in my neighborhood were young kids and
Mm.
teens,
Mm.
and kids resonate with me. I think it's
Mhm.
just because I'm just their size, right? And I'm
How
friendly
tall
enough.
are you?
I'm 5'2".
Okay, well, you're not that short.
Yeah, not sure.
I'm 5'4 3/4".
Yeah,
When
you
you're
got,
in
you got to
when
kick
you're
it
in
to
the
three
bottom
quarters.
half of the 5 feet, like every quarter counts, right?
Right, right. So,
So what would
right.
you do with these kids? Like, what sorts of relationships did you forge with members of the community?
I think, I treated them like who they were. They were human beings. They're children. What, they're preteens, and those are always the fun ones.
Mm.
But unfortunately, a lot of the kids that I had went to a vocational school in the area.
Mm.
And one of my kids in the neighborhood, he actually went to a regular high school, we'll
Mhm.
call it that. And he came in his first week in grade 9, and he was just flustered. He's like, oh, it's so hard. It's so different. Like, I'm struggling. I said, what are you struggling? And he goes, well, French class. I said, perfect. I'm fluent in French.
Did you
And
go to French immersion when you were growing up?
I was in French immersion from kindergarten straight through to about grade 5. I didn't get too
Okay.
far, but it kind of sticks with you.
Yeah.
So I started an after school program because I said to him, you don't worry about your parents if you get kicked out of regular and go to vocational. You worry about me.
Yes.
So we're going to work on this. I'm here, at least 7 days a week. And then we have 5 days off.
7 days a week?
We would do 7
Wow.
on, 5 off, 8 on, 4 off. So
Cool. Okay.
we were there quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I said, the days that I'm here, I'm available to you. Just come and see me, right? So then I kind of thought, there's something else going on here. A lot of these kids were in that, anywhere from 13 to 17 range. I had a lot in that neighborhood. So I
Mm.
started doing kind of an after school program. So
Mhm.
they would come into the community room we had. We'd do whatever homework they had to get done. And then I would release the basketballs. There was a basketball
Mm.
court in the neighborhood that we held the basketballs for them. And I said, not until this is done, not until we get our schoolwork done, then we'll do basketball.
Mm.
So I kind of like got to control a little bit more like that. But they also felt comfortable coming to me with things. And then all of a sudden the relationship started building more and building more. And they started telling me things and
Mhm.
talking to me about things. And then I started realizing who what we would consider our latchkey kids were, because they
Mm.
were coming home, mom and dad weren't, and they had keys and they shouldn't have. Right. So
Oh.
there was also a very fine line that you had to be careful that you still are the officer, but you still know that you can be the person in authority as well.
Yeah, of
A
course.
very fine line to walk.
So, how long do you think it took for you to get comfortable? Because like you said, you went in there and it was like shell shocking as you put it. Do you think that you were naive going in there from, you know, growing up outside the city to overlooking the city from inside an office to actually being on the ground and forging relationships with people. Like how long did it take for you to get comfortable in that role, would you say?
You know what, it took me a while.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would probably say I was pretty comfortable around 4 months, a little more around 6 months. But the thing was, it actually shocked me how much I knew and how much information I got out of the community. Because sometimes the Toronto police would call asking for intelligence, asking for information, and I'd be like, I don't know, I just got here, right? And then I always knew who to go to. The kids knew, right? The kids know
Yeah.
everything. It's a shame in some respect, but they knew.
Yeah.
So, you know, I
Like
had a
what kind of
bunch.
stuff? What kind of stuff would you learn?
So I had a unit call me one time. They said, you know, we have these 5 nicknames. Do you know who they are? And I'm like, I don't. I just got here. I don't know anybody. I don't know the major players. I don't know who lives here and whatever. And I
Mhm.
go down to the basketball area with the kids and, you know, just sit around talking with them. And then somebody would come by and say, you know, yell out a nickname. I'm like,
Hello.
what's on my list? I go,
Yeah.
why would you call him that? Well, his name's so and so. And I'm like, oh, so then you kind of figure out, yeah, the kids are the ones who knows what goes
Oh,
on around here. Sad, sad that they
yeah.
did.
I know.
One particular guy had a nickname that he got from being in jail. Now,
Mm.
the fact that this 8-year-old child knew this and knew the reason why
Mhm.
tugged you a little bit. Won't deny it, tugged at my heart a little bit.
Of
Because they're not
course.
things that I would have never even known at age
Of
8,
course.
right? But they grew up in a fast and furious environment, right?
Mhm.
There's not a lot of supervision. And, you know, a lot of these parents are trying to do their best.
Mhm.
And sometimes they're involved in their own situations. Sometimes they're having to work late shifts and they're relying on like older siblings or relying on neighborhoods because really it's a village
Yeah, of
and they
course.
rely on each other to help raise their kids in the
Yeah.
same aspect. So it is there is that sad aspect of it. There really is. But I found myself getting very involved in a lot of the youth in the community because of those
Yeah.
situations.
You just reminded me of a couple stories from my reporting career, and one of them was from, and oh, they weren't. I was thinking for a second it was from the same community housing complex, but it wasn't. One of them was one of the first homicides that I covered as a reporter in the field. Was a young man who was shot in like a car to car drive by shooting, and I interviewed his mother a few days later, and she couldn't understand how this could happen. And she told me like I knew and police knew that I don't know if he was officially a gang member, but he was definitely sort of in that lifestyle. And but she couldn't understand it. And I asked her, like, do you know who his friends were? And she said, like, I'm working 3 jobs. I'm not around. How can I know who his friends are? You know, like I'm just they had come here from another country and she'd done this because she wanted him to grow up in a safe place. And then that ended up happening. And then what you just said about the kids knowing things, it reminded me of another time as a reporter going into a place where a homicide had happened, and it had happened, I think, a couple days earlier. And I was trying to find exactly where it happened. And we were looking around, and it was one of those complexes that's like really like a maze, you know, like
Mm,
where is it? And this mother was walking with her child who was probably like 7 years old. And the kid goes, "Are you looking for the place that such and such and such and such were killed?" It was just like nothing. I'm
yeah,
like, "Yeah, I am, but like, you don't know where he's." "No, I'll show you where it is." And I looked at the mom and she's like, and he ran us
yeah.
over to this memorial, this makeshift memorial, candles and balloons and flowers and everything.
Mm.
And those moments just stick with you because they've certainly shaped the person that I am and the way that I view the world. And I imagine it's the same for you, you know, when you see how the other half lives, you know?
And it truly is the other half. I mean, I
Mhm.
remember a situation where a young man, he was 17 years of age, he was in a gang. His family knew, they did everything they could to get him out. He
Mm.
didn't want to listen because he's the big man on campus. He knows better. They're 17, right?
Mhm. Invincible.
Yep. And he opened the door and he was executed there on his front step.
Mm.
And his parents were just like, live by the gun, die by the gun, because they
Mm.
knew and they tried. And you have that feeling of remorseful for those parents because they tried their darndest. But
Mhm.
eventually it's his decision, right?
Mhm. So
And it's no
sad.
matter what you try. But yeah, it's sad. He has his whole life ahead of him. And
Yeah.
just
How
for
what sort of
these
impact did that
situations.
have on you when you would get to know some of these kids who you can maybe see them going down that path because you meet them when they're so
Mhm.
young, right? And
Yeah.
you were how long were you there in that community? Was it for very long or no?
I was probably there for almost a year. It was just
Okay.
less than a year that I was in that community, but so much happens in that time. And
Yeah.
I saw, oh, there was always that two group of kids. There was the one rowdy group. It's like any high school. You got the rowdy group. You got the kids that just come home and do as they're told, and the ones that just kind of like the introvert versus extrovert, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has that. And I had one particular child in my neighborhood, and he was like that. He was a bit of an introvert. Didn't really associate. He was a nice kid. He was always very polite.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left Toronto Housing full time, I went on to become a special constable at Queen's Park, but I stayed on part-time as a dispatcher. So the officer that took over in my community was probably a couple of years after the fact. He called me asking me questions about this particular child because he had just been executed. And I was like, of all the kids that I never thought this would happen to, and it really got to me because he was that kid who was going to make it out. He was that kid that always had his school books with him. I never would have thought something like this. And it wasn't like drive-by. It wasn't accidental. It was purposeful that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very upsetting. And they were trying to like ascertain from me if I had any information and stuff. And I said, absolutely not. I
Yeah.
can't even tell you because I never saw him play out with anybody or associate with anybody. He wasn't that kid.
So sad. What can happen in the span of a couple of years to put
Yeah.
somebody down a different path. Okay, so you just mentioned Queen's Park. What made you go like from community housing to Queen's Park? What another completely different life that you were exposed to?
It was very, very different. I remember the first day on the job, there was myself and another gentleman who got hired, and the staff sergeant looked at me and goes, "Which one of you came from housing?" I said, I did. And he's like, "Well, you're going to be very bored here." And I was like, okay. And I was looking at it as a step up, right? I'm going on levels of enforcement. So I started as a dispatcher, then I became a security officer. Now I'm a special constable.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I'm getting another feet under my belt.
Yeah.
Let's get this going. Like I was going to learn a lot, and I learned a lot when
What did you learn? What do you learn in Queen's Park?
you know what? People always say that, like, what do you do? Just listen, you're like a
I mean,
desk.
I don't know. I don't know
sit at
anything
a
about
desk.
Queen's Park. I think I stepped foot inside Queen's Park in my like nearly 15 years of reporting in Toronto. I stepped foot inside there maybe once, and it was because I was working a weekend shift and we had to file from downtown, and the camera guy had like a key to the CTV edit suite in Queen's Park. No politicians around, so I know nothing. So just tell me what
Well,
there is.
you know what? It's funny because we deal a lot with the media there.
Of course.
And we got to know a lot of the media personnel quite well, and someone come by and we're like, but you also did get to know all the MPPs, the premier, and some of the premiers were great, and they knew you by name. They'd walk in. I had a nickname when I was there, and it stuck.
What was it?
Keebler.
Keebler?
Yeah, like the elf.
A politician gave you that nickname?
No. One of my sergeants did, but everyone knew them, including the premier at the time. He found out that I was leaving. He came up to me. He's like, "So Keebler, I hear you're leaving us." And I said, "I am, sir."
I need to look up Keebler while we're
Keebler?
talking because I don't recognize that name even.
The Keebler, like the Keebler elf cookies, you can't get them here in Canada. Remember?
Oh
The
yeah,
little guys in the trees.
of course, I didn't know what his name was. All right, maybe I'll have to bring that up like
Right.
when I edit this thing.
One of my it was all I'll do from an incident where a sergeant and I were just going head to head, and he was a really tall guy, and he's like, just looked down at me, he goes, "You're like a little Keebler elf," and it stuck. And so when I was leaving, the premier came to say goodbye, and he's like, "Seriously, Keebler, what is your real name?" I said, "Sir, it's Kirsten." He's like, "Okay, Keebler. Well, good luck with Toronto Police." I don't understand why people find it so difficult to say Kirsten, but I do go by my real name. Everyone calls me by a nickname, but that's what I was known as when I was working there, and everyone knew me like that. But I did learn a lot about government, things that you brush by it a bit in school. You probably never remember it. You watch what you do on news. When you're behind the scenes, like the amount of times that I sit through committees, I sit in the chambers and I listen to arguments that are going on. And if it was one of those things where if I heard one more debate about Hydro One at the time,
oh my God,
you're also in the chambers and you're behind the scenes and you're seeing what goes on between, all of the governmental parties.
You're a fly on the wall.
Yeah, like the shenanigans, but I learned a lot about government and about
Mhm.
law and what it takes to change a law
Mm,
and so I was gaining a lot more. And at the time I was still taking night school courses
yeah,
and there's a great law library working in there. So that was
yeah.
through night shifts. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot and you were very much involved in a lot of things. I then went on to also become part of the public order unit through the
Mm,
LSS, which
okay.
the training is done by the Toronto Police Service.
What's LFS?
LSS meaning the Legislative
Oh,
Security System Service. That's
okay.
at
Okay.
Queen's Park.
LSS.
And went through the week-long grueling training that Toronto puts on for that. But we were the ones who were always on the front line.
I didn't even realize that LSS had its own public order unit.
They do,
I
yeah.
mean, given that it's just like situated right smack in the middle of downtown, I would just assume that Toronto police would like public order for anybody watching that who isn't familiar. That's, you got your shields out, you're
Mhm.
part of, big public demonstrations or riots or whatever.
Yes. Yeah, we got
So,
trained with police. And when I did my training, it was, like I said, facilitated by the Toronto Police Service, but it
okay.
was also York Region, Durham Region, OPP were also there. And there was also members from the fire department. And we
Oh,
were all training together as one unit. No one looked at us as any different. But it was funny how the dynamics in the room changed when on the first day, because they're all looking at like, who are these guys, right? Because especially if you're an outside source of Toronto, you don't know who we are.
yeah.
But a lot at the time, the demographics of what was going on at the time, in the early 2000s, a lot of demos were happening.
Mm,
Students were
mm,
were doing demonstrations constantly against the government, right? And it
mm,
was really around the time that Harris had changed over to McGuinty
mm,
and Ernie Hughes was coming in. So there was a lot of turmoil at the times,
mhm,
things that
mhm,
were going on. But people protested a lot back then. So they
mm.
started showing videos to the training group of protests and why the public order was important, but they were all on Queen's Park property
Ah,
and we were always the front line. So it
ah.
made them kind of go, okay, let's respect these guys a little bit
Okay,
more, right?
they know how
Because
it works.
I need
Yeah.
to know what's going on. But
Yeah.
all too, like it's funny, like as a democracy in the Charter of Rights, people can demonstrate here for things that are going on back in their own country. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that was a little bit, you'd be on the front line at Queen's Park, they're there to demonstrate in regards to something that's going on back home, and they're
Mm-hmm.
doing it in their own language. So
Mm,
we really had to be in tune to people's body language, whether we
mhm,
change, because I don't speak whatever language they're talking
mhm,
about, Ukrainian or
mhm,
Farsi or
mhm,
Somalian, I don't know.
mhm,
We none of us knew. So there was a lot of having to kind of sit back, hold the line, take directions at that time. So there was a lot of discipline with it, but
mhm.
it was a very interesting. There were some days where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I think before I left, the last demo I worked was the big farmers demo that took over downtown Toronto when the guy set himself on fire.
Oh, goodness. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember that one.
Yes. I remember
Yeah.
hearing about it, but oh, interesting.
It was the coldest day of the year. It was
Mm.
horrible.
Ah,
And we were on the front line at like 5 in the morning. We're shivering so bad. We can feel our skin rubbing on our pads because our pants are all covered in pads. And this guy was causing a commotion to he almost took what was going on with the farmers away from what was happening because he
mm,
started to instill something down at the bottom of the park around College Street.
mm.
So of course, the little one, they sent me to go.
Keebler.
I said the healer go running into the building to get the ADA to run all the way down in snow up to my knees. And I was just running. And then my partner was this big guy. I'm like, well, you can keep up later. And as soon as I got down there, the fire department showed up to hose the guy down. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm done.
Bring me
That
back to
day I
community
was,
housing.
it was a very exhausting day. It was very,
Interesting.
but
And it's
it
so
was
funny
interesting.
because somebody said that you were going to be so bored being at Queen's Park, but
And I wasn't.
you learned a lot. What you were saying about kind of being a fly on the wall a few minutes ago reminded me of some of the Toronto police officers I've spoken to who started out as court officers and just
Mhm.
how much information they absorbed. Because I've sat in a lot of courtrooms and you always see the court officers, they're standing there. There's some formalities that they have to do, but they're mostly just, bringing people in and out of the prisoner's box and whatnot. Um, but now I think about them like just all the information that they're absorbing.
Yeah.
And same with those Queen's Park officers. I have some friends that work down at Queen's Park. I might have to tell them like,
They're
hey,
watching.
yeah,
They
they're
know what's going
watching.
on.
They're watching you. Okay, so where did you go from there?
After there, it was I came to Toronto Police in 2005 as a parking
Okay.
officer, and I've remained in this position ever since, coming up on my 18 years here.
Wow. So this is your longest stint then in all of your law enforcement
Yes.
type roles, right? What
Yeah.
attracted you to parking?
Uh, you know what? It was just, there was a posting and I
Mhm.
applied.
Mhm.
That's all it was. I thought, well, there's my foot in the door with the Toronto Police.
Yeah.
My thought process, of course, from each level of going up, that eventually I was going to apply as a police officer.
Yeah.
But I got in with parking, and that just kind of got away with me. Unfortunately, I've also dealt with a lot of health issues in the last
Mm.
10 years. So it's kind
Oh,
of
sorry.
broadsided a lot of that. That's
Yeah.
all I dealt with. But unfortunately, that was how my life went.
Mhm.
So I've made it what it is. And
Mm.
it is a good job. I mean,
Mhm.
for all the things that I've done here, I can't complain.
So tell me about the things that you've done. Because like I said, you're still smiling, but when I think parking enforcement officer, I think of people like screaming at you and chasing you down the sidewalk. I mean, I don't know if anybody would do that, but tell
Oh,
me
it's
about
been
your
done.
job. It's
We
been
had a
done? You've been
go
chased down?
of course I have.
Oh
We all,
god.
you know what? I don't think there is an officer on the job that hasn't said it yet.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a time where I haven't been in a confrontational situation, or haven't been assaulted. Not to
Mm.
say that it's going to happen to everybody, but
Mhm.
I'm in a position within the unit that is very confrontational. I create controversy. I
Mhm.
create that conflict. It's
Mhm.
how I have to deal with it. There are days where I'm just minding my own business, riding my bike throughout the city. Like, how great is that? It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. I get on a bike and ride for 8 hours, and I
Yeah.
happen to write, quite a few parking tickets.
Mhm.
It's not exactly the ideal situation, but it's how a person has to react to that, right?
Mhm.
It's not the job into itself. Like I've said to other people, if you work at McDonald's and you screw up somebody's order, they're going to lose their mind on you. How is
Mhm.
that any different than laying a parking ticket on a vehicle and the person comes back and sees you doing it?
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's really a reactionary of how that person can take it. And I tell every new recruit, you cannot take it personally. They're
Mhm.
mad at the uniform. They're not mad at you.
Mhm.
There was times before when we went to court, and I'd show up to court and they want to fight it, and they see me in a suit, not in a uniform, and they're like, "You're the officer?" I'm like,
You're a
"What did
human
you
being?
expect?" Like, it's almost like they expect this big ogre to show up, and this like tiny little thing shows up, and they're not. They're really blown away by it, right?
Really?
It's funny because you don't know. You see a name, you don't necessarily have that interaction when you get the ticket. You just know you're mad as heck because you were the person who went down to Cherry Beach and parked on the grass.
Yes.
You're the horrible person. I don't make the fines. I just enforce the law. There's a
Yes.
difference. So you really have to look at in that respect, right?
Mhm.
So for many of my years within the parking enforcement unit, I've been assigned to the disabled liaison unit.
Mhm.
So my
Tell
main
me about
role,
that. Yeah, what is it?
so basically anybody that's in possession of an accessible parking permit,
Mhm.
I'm out to ensure that you're using it properly. And in the city of Toronto, anywhere from the boundaries of Mississauga to Pickering, from York region down to Lake, we encompass a whole area. So I'm one
Mm.
officer during a shift that does the whole entire city
One officer?
at that one particular shift. So there's 6 of
Wow.
us on a team. So I'm currently dealing with 2 new guys today, and they've gotten a big eye open the last few days being with me. And she
Yeah.
said, yeah, it's something a lot of people don't really understand, but there is a lot of misuse.
Mhm.
There is a lot of quote unquote fraud being dealt with. As people think they're always fake. Now I
Mm.
won't deny there is a large incumbent of fake ones these days.
How do you spot them? Are they pretty bad?
Just good. I'm just kidding.
You got your radar. Ding, ding,
I
ding,
am.
ding, ding.
Like even today, I mean, granted, we keep going on about my height, but it was a very large pickup truck, and I can see from a distance that was fake. So he hands it to me, and I'm like, "Sir, where's the original?" And he holds up another one. He throws on the dash, closes the door, and takes off. And I look, and I go, "It's another photocopy." So it's like, you can get your car at the pound now, right? So
Yeah.
there's some investigative wheels that are turning right now for me in regards to the situation, but you get that very often.
So that
To
guy
make
just
you
took
know,
off, but he just took off?
oh yeah,
And then what do you do after that happens?
well,
I mean,
there's
you would have his license plate number, right?
right. There's a lot of information. I mean, granted, we are connected to the Toronto Police Service, right?
Yeah.
So we do have means and resources. There are
Yeah.
some situations where, you know what, I rely on my counterparts at traffic services, and I'll call up a detective and I'll have a conversation. Hey, can you please help me find out who this guy is? Because
Yeah.
at this point, I don't have the right to identify an individual, but I have abilities to identify.
Right. Right.
So I'm on the
Force
right
the
path. I
organization.
know I have no problem. I always get my guy.
Yeah. Okay. So what is surprising these new guys that you're training right now? And what surprised you when you started in the disability liaison part of parking?
I think how frequently it exists,
Really?
right? Um, or the fact that people treat us the way that we do. Same situation yesterday. I approached an individual who didn't want to be spoken to by us. They knew they were doing wrong. They've been trying to get away with this for months. Finally, we show up. Finally, we're there to retain the permit to charge them on the Highway Traffic Act. They know this. They take off. Well, now that's 2 charges, and I know who you are. So you'll get it later. We'll get you.
Really?
Don't worry about it. You never, that's the funny thing I find with some people. You run from the law, no matter what you're doing, they're going to find you.
Yes.
And we're no different in the parking enforcement unit.
Yeah.
There's always means and ways, and we will be able to identify
I love that.
you.
Kirsten, I'm coming for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You told me a story in our previous conversation about a young guy. I think you said he was like a 17-year-old kid or something who you caught misusing one of these accessibility permits. And the reason I bring this up is because it kind of brings us full circle to the beginning of our conversation with your whole ethos as a teenager of step up or step out. Can you tell me about this interaction? Because it's also illustrative of a lot of the interactions that you have, right? Because we were talking about your interactions with the public. You interact with the public a lot more than some people might realize.
Oh yeah, I do. I interact a lot, and I force it, right? Because a lot of times when I'm at I might be on street, I might be at a particular private property location. And this particular evening, I was out in the North York area, and yeah, a young kid, a 17-year-old, pulls up into a disabled space. He's got a permit, goes into the store, he comes back out. I approach him. I'm like, "Can I see the permit?" He's like, "Yes, it belongs to my father." Fantastic. Where's your dad? Oh, he just passed away. But dad was living in Ottawa at the time as well. But I'm like, okay. And I asked him then for some identification. He didn't have any on him. So I said, "Can I get your name?" So he gives me his name, which is a very popular name in this particular neighborhood. And I'm like, "Listen, unfortunately, I'm going to have to call for a police unit because a police unit has to identify in these situations." And I said, "Are you sure you don't even have your student card with you? Anything with your name and picture?" "No, I have nothing. I have nothing." So I go back to my car. I check the kid out. Turns out he's suspended. I'm like, what is a 17-year-old?
Suspended driver.
Suspended driver. How is he suspended at 17? Like it blew me away. I expect somebody in their 20s, or I expect his license to maybe just be defaulted because of this whole, honestly, we've both had our driver's license for how long? This G1, G2 system. I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah. Hey, I learned to drive in Saskatchewan where you turn 16, they just give you the full license. And that's it.
That was it.
I still don't understand. After many years in Ontario, I still have no idea how you guys do it. But
right. Yeah. So I thought this kid was something had to do with his graduated licensing. Maybe it was suspended for that reason. Started doing like a little more of a deep dive on this kid while he's sitting there. And it turns out, he's already been charged with taking a vehicle without consent. He's been suspended, drive a few times, charged. I'm like, what's going on here? So obviously the police officers arrive, and I said to them, "Listen, guys, I'm just in the middle of an investigation. All I need you to do is identify him and say who he is." Well, in the meantime, of course, he's now called his mother. Mom now comes to the scene, and I'm having a conversation with this kid. I said, "You are going to get a ticket from me. You are going to go to court." And I turned, and he was at that point, he starts getting upset. "Oh, well, my father this and my father that." And I said, "I understand this, kid. I get it. I was that kid. I was that person. I was younger than you when my father passed away. But I stepped up. I didn't step out, but I made conscious decisions. The silliest reason to be in trouble with the law right now is your driver's license. You're not going in the right direction right now. And it's only going to perpetuate, and you need to get this fixed, and you need to start tonight." Right. He's crying. I think he's hearing it. He's getting it. And then I turned to the mother. I said, "We're done tonight. He is not the man of the house. You are. He is still a child. He's 17. He's driving your car. The next time he drives your car and he's suspended, you're going to get charged, knowingly allowing him to drive." She's like, "Oh, but," I said, "There is no buts here. It's the law, man." And I get the stress you have on yourself, having to raise the children on your own. But unfortunately, everyone's got to work here together. And until his license is reinstated, he's not to drive. Do you get it? And they're like, yes. So they all went off, and I'm hoping a positive manner. I have never run into them again.
Mhm.
And I knew by circumstances, looking at the address, I knew where this kid has grown up. It
Mhm.
is not one of the nicest buildings in Toronto community housing. I already had that forethought going into the conversation, right? And I'm just like, there's got to be something better. And these officers were like, wow, that was incredible. Like, that was amazing. And I was like, no, like, that's your job to yell at them. But I was just so like, kids, stop, come on, like, be better. Like,
Mhm.
this is just a silly, silly reason. And I don't think, honestly, I got the impression no one has ever really explained it to him. And
Mhm.
he didn't really owe that much more to reinstate his license. And that's what it was, on paid fines. Like, you
Mhm.
need to deal with this, get
Mhm.
this dealt with, go to the ministry, have a conversation, right? But
Mhm.
I don't think anybody ever took the time to sit down and talk to him about it.
Yeah, educate on how you can get yourself
Mm,
out of this mess.
yeah,
Like, don't
yeah,
just write yourself off.
no, because you're just gonna keep getting it wrong and wrong and wrong. I've talked
Yeah.
to adults that have been suspended drivers, and they owe, upwards of 25,000. Like,
Really?
stop driving, get this rectified, get on a program,
Yes.
do a payment. Oh, I
Just
can do that?
stop.
And
Just
I'm like,
don't
you're
get
an
in your car.
adult, just figure it out. And try, I sit there and shake my head at sometimes, and I'm just like,
Oh my gosh.
I got that parking ticket. I was like, oh my God, I paid it. Like, I don't want to
Oh,
be arrears even for $30, you know?
yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. So, Kirsten, again, we started this conversation talking about your work ethic. You're not
Mhm.
just a parking enforcement officer, a very busy one at that. You have another job. Tell me about that.
I'm an educational assistant in the Durham Region Public School Board for kids with special needs.
And what made you want to do that work?
Honestly, somebody approached me about it, and I said, you know what? You'd be really, really good at this. Like, we're hiring right now, like, uncertified, like, you'd be fantastic at this.
Mhm.
And I applied like a year ago, and then I all of a sudden just started working. Honestly, I've been involved with persons with special needs for a very long time. Even in high school, I was
Mhm.
very close with a lot of the kids in high school that were in the special needs class.
Mhm.
And I would have lunch with them every Tuesday, type of thing.
Mm.
And when I started working at Toronto Housing in '99 is also when I started volunteering with the Law Enforcement Torch Run for Special Olympics. And as I got on with Toronto Police, a couple of the individuals who were running the committee at the time invited me onto the committee, and
Mm.
I've been involved with them ever since. So for 12 years. So for the last 22 years, I've been involved with Special Olympics Ontario in different capacities. I go out and I volunteer at events during the day for motion ball,
Mhm.
or whether or not we're hosting something through the LETR, whether it be summer games, winter games, whatever it is, or
What's
whatever we need to do.
LETR?
LETR means Law Enforcement Torch Run.
Right. Law
Right.
enforcement.
So,
Police
so
speak.
the please speak, right? Our acronyms are too
You
much.
got so many acronyms. Yeah.
So I think a lot of my experience with those athletes
Mhm.
has really helped me develop into getting to the position that I am. And I can honestly say, like, my days off that I spend in the school,
Mm.
I would, they're fun. I love it. Like,
Mhm.
I could see how it can be very exhausting if you're
Mhm.
doing it full time, but for me, it's new to me,
Mm.
and it's very rewarding.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just like, some of them are just so lovable, but
Mm.
some of them you really have to work hard. And a lot of them blow my mind, absolutely blow my mind. They're amazing children. They really are.
Those ones that you really have to work hard, I can't help but think that you would be like the perfect person for that.
No, thank you.
You've got so much patience and that tough love. And you also said something to me in our previous conversation about, like you I don't remember how you phrased it, but basically what I walked away from is you meet people with high expectations. And it's
Mhm.
like a feeling that I know you can do this. So it's just and you truly feel that. So is that accurate? Is that an accurate portrayal of your interactions with people and these kids with special needs?
Yeah. The kids with special needs are like, they're fun, right? Because they see me as a new person,
Mhm.
right? And so they try to, like, they get that little glimmer in their eye. They know, oh, I'm going to test her out, right? It doesn't
Mhm.
matter if they're in kindergarten and they could be in grade 12, right? You get that little bit of something with them. But a
Mhm.
lot of them, I also get a lot of them going. I had one little guy who was, my gosh, he was cute, but he ran like the wind. He was a runner. He was an autistic child. He was fantastic. He had
Uh-huh.
that little glimmer in his eye all the time when I knew he was about to go.
Yeah.
But I said to him, enough. We're going to sit down. We're going to do our schoolwork, and then we can go to gym class. And he looked at me and goes, what are you, the police? And I was like, you know what? All right, well, we're gonna play this. Okay, well, let's do the math and then we'll see about that. Then it was like that chat that I challenged him back, right?
Yes.
And you always get the, well, this is stupid, I don't want to do this stuff. You get the kids who are a little bit defiant that want to work back. And I'm like, explain to me why it's stupid. And then they're like, well, no one's ever asked me that before, kind of thing, right? Like, wow. Yeah, I might think it's stupid too, because I'm not the best at math, but we have to get through this.
Yeah, exactly.
There's always that reward at the end. But some of them are so good where I'm like, wow, you just blew me away.
Yeah.
I don't know how, like when I see a 5-year-old on an iPad,
I
I
know.
almost want to bring mine in because they can like fix it. It's
I know.
how
Yeah, exactly.
I watched a child that has ADHD. The way he maneuvered a laptop was just astonishing. Like, I wish I could do that. And it's just that mindset of them is amazing. Like, they're just brilliant little things, right? So it really has been an eye opener for me, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I really do.
So what do you think it is that's drawn you to like kids with special needs in general? Like from such a young age, you said that in high school you'd go and have your Tuesday lunches with them, and then start volunteering with the LETR, Law Enforcement Torch Run. What, like, do you have a personal connection to this, or is it just you're just that kind of beautiful human being?
Well, I don't really look at it that way. And people always ask me that question, and I just don't have a defining situation that it happened to. I get it. I get being involved with something. I get sport. So with Special Olympics, that's what it is. It's sport. It's a sense of belonging. Like, did I always make every sports team I went on? Yeah. But there was times when you're like, you're not the first person picked. You might not even be the last. You're not even might be involved. You might as well just go sit on the bench. But in Special Olympics, everybody plays. Everybody wins. Everybody gets that chance to get involved. But the thing with Special Olympics is it gives them a sense of community. It gets them out, it gets them involved, it gets them to be with other kids. On the weekend, I met a family while, I was inspecting permits, and they had 2 children, school age of 6 and 9 years of age, and they both were autistic. And they just started talking about, oh, he's become a couch potato. He just drinks a lot of pop. They start talking about one of their children. I said, well, have you ever thought about Special Olympics? Do you live in the Toronto area? This is who you need to contact. This is what you need to get them involved with. Why don't you start out something small like bowling? Do they like to swim? Maybe aquatics might be something for them, because it really gets them out and to be with kids that understand them themselves and accept them for who they are. I had one kid, I was in school one day, and he was bawling and bawling because this one particular child didn't understand autism. He didn't understand how hard it was for him every day. And I'm like, I know. And you are so right, little man. You are so right. But we can't, default him because he doesn't understand what autism is. We can only try and help him understand, but you can't get mad at him for that. Because he doesn't know. You're the only child he knows. And I get it's very hard for you. But he doesn't have any other friends like him, so to say, right? So it's been like kind of a challenge. He lives in my neighborhood, trying to find his parents, trying to, like, this is something you might want to think about. I've gotten some parents, even some friends of mine who are on the service who have autistic children. And I'm like, you kind of need this. And one of them was like, oh my God, you're so right. And he went to a very good friend of mine. He now is on the committee as well. He adopted a child who ended up being autistic. And she's, I think Denise like 11 now. But he's got her involved in Special Olympics, and they were at a track meet back in the spring. And she was like, Dad, go away. I'm with my friends. And he was like, all choked up. And he told me, and I was crying. I was all choked up because she's made friends, which she didn't have before. But you know what? Those are the stories that make me go, yes. But a lot of my athletes I've met that are adults, they became disabled. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. That could happen to me today. Tomorrow, doesn't know. Totally. You can become intellectually disabled due to an illness or an accident or unfortunate situation. And some people I have met, they were maybe 3 or 4 years old. They were born a perfectly healthy, active, thriving person. They caught a virus. They started having seizures. And next thing you know, their mobility is gone. Their speech is gone. And they've rented themselves. Now you have a parent who thought they had a perfect child, and now they don't. So not every person has special needs was born special needs, right? It's how you deal with it going forward, right?
Mhm.
Like I always say to people when they discuss my illness, I said, well, I didn't create me. I have to maintain me. There's a
Mhm.
difference. You
Mhm.
have to work with what you have.
Mhm.
And these athletes and these students, they do. They don't hide what's wrong with them. As an EA that they've never met before, some of them, this maybe is their first interaction, they're so, they tell me everything. I've got this, this, and this. I can't do this, 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 but I'm gonna do that, that, and the other. And then I'll look at the teacher and they're like, oh, he's lying. Or they're like, yeah, he's right. Because some of them, my gosh, they're so funny, right? It's like any other child. They're trying to
Yes.
push your button, right? As an
Yeah.
adult, they want to see what they can get away with. They're no indifferent. They
Yeah.
really aren't.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I just think you're such a beautiful person, Kirsten. And like I told you, you know, this whole TPS Trust campaign, sometimes officers will reach out to me and say, hey, I would be happy to have a conversation with you. And sometimes I reach out to officers, and this last round, like, oh my goodness, I forgot to put, did you just hear my doorbell ring?
Yes.
I usually put a sign up on my door, do not ring doorbell or knock on door. I forgot today. So anyway, that's just the latest delivery. Um, anyway, with you, I reached out to you because I was just like looking at Toronto police officers on Twitter, and I came across you, parking enforcement officer. I'm like, oh, I've never talked to a parking enforcement officer before, like certainly not for this campaign. So I sent you a message and you messaged me back, and I had no idea about anything about you. You know, all I know is
Right,
that everybody has a story to tell. And you certainly
right.
have shown that today, and just what a beautiful soul you have. And I hope that people think about that after watching this when they see somebody writing them a ticket for
Mm.
whatever. And I hope they also think about it when they're considering taking their mom's accessibility permit and
Mhm.
maybe, you know, going for a little spin or getting a closer spot in front of that store that they're going to be popping into. But Kirsten, like, is there anything else that you want people to know about you, or about, because we are talking to you today because you're a parking enforcement officer, you know, your fellow officers, or just policing in general, law enforcement in general? You've worn so many different hats during your very varied career.
I think you just nailed it by saying, as a parking enforcement officer, that I humanize it. Like we are human. We have a job, and unfortunately, it's not a very loving job. But it has to get done, because if we weren't enforcing it, then there'd be more chaos,
Mhm.
right? It's a very thankless job, as mostly everybody will tell you. But I don't take it personal. Just know that every single ticket you get, there's a human behind that,
Mhm.
right?
Might not be a lovable job, but
Yeah.
it's likely a lovable person who's
Yes,
doing that job.
exactly, Tamara.
Kirsten, it's been such a pleasure
Thank
talking
you.
to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Be well. See you soon.